Hey, book lovers. I'm Katie Dodrell, and this is While I Read. Welcome to the discussion. Today, I'm going to talk about my top 10 books that I read in 2023. This episode will be divided into two parts. The first part will cover books 10 through 6, and the second part will cover my top 5 books of 2023. I love to read. Since I was a little girl, reading has been my number one hobby. When I was about 10 years old, I had a friend come over to my house to play one day. And we had a good time playing, but after a while, I needed a break. I actually really wanted to go back and read the book that I was reading. So I came up with a plan. I told my friend, "You go jump on the trampoline while I read." And it was a pretty good plan. She got to play, I got to read, win-win. The only drawback was that my parents overheard me telling her that. And to this day, they still tease me about telling my friend to jump on the trampoline while I read. So that's how I came up with the title for my YouTube channel. I'm always talking to people about what I'm reading and giving people book recommendations, and I love to talk about books. So I thought that I would start this YouTube channel so I could share my thoughts about books with more people. I hope that if you have read any of the books that I talk about today, you'll leave some comments because I would love to discuss it with you. And I also hope that you will give me some book recommendations as well. This past year, for the first time, I kept up with all the books that I read using Goodreads. I know Goodreads has been around for a long time. For some reason, I've never used it before, but I'm glad that I've started now. Thanks to Goodreads, I know that I read 86 books this year. I know 86 is not a lot of books compared to some people who read over 100 books in a year, but I still think 86 books is pretty good. I'm not a super fast reader, and of course, like everybody, I have a lot of outside responsibilities. I have a full-time job as an English professor. I'm a wife, I'm a mama, and I love all of those things, but they do cut into my reading time severely. Reading is something that I always make time for because I love it so much. I get a lot of my reading in at night before I go to bed. I also make sure to take my Kindle everywhere I go. It's very convenient to just be able to open my Kindle up and start reading whenever I have any little bit of free time. This year, I've really been on a mystery and thriller kick, but I've also read some comedies as well as some old favorites. The books that are on my top 10 list mostly were new books that were published in 2023, but not all of them. So these are my top 10 books that I read in 2023, not necessarily books that were published in 2023. Picking my top 10 list was really hard. What I tried to do was pick books that I didn't just enjoy while reading them, but books that stayed with me for a while, that I kept thinking about after I was done. Sometimes it was because the book was so exciting or suspenseful. Sometimes it was because it was just a really funny book. Sometimes it was because I identified with the characters so much. And of course, the best books were ones that had all of those characteristics. So let's get started. Number 10. My number 10 book is Mother-Daughter Murder Night by Nina Simon. This book was published in 2023, and it's described in the book blurb as a lighthearted whodunit about a grandmother-mother-daughter trio of amateur sleuths, Gilmore Girls, but with murder. That book blurb gives a perfect feel for the vibe of this book. When I heard about this book, I was intrigued by the concept of the mother, grandmother, and daughter working together to solve a crime, and this book totally lived up to my expectations. It was hilarious, but it was also very touching. The grandmother character in the book, Lana, actually has cancer, and she is forced to move in with her daughter, Beth, and her granddaughter, Jack, as she goes through treatments and works to beat the cancer. I was initially a little worried that this book might be sad or depressing, but it's not at all. It shows the difficulties of this woman fighting cancer, and it shows how hard it is for her to give up her independence and rely on her daughter. And it shows how hard it is for her daughter, who has her own life, to care for her mother. But it does it in a funny, light way that's totally realistic and will also make you think. The women live in Elkhorn Slough, which I had never heard of, but it's apparently a nature preserve in Monterey, California, that is a habitat for sea otters, harbor seals, lots of different types of birds, just hundreds of different species. The setting is beautifully described, and it's almost a character in the book, which was another thing I loved about it. I heard about this book on the Friends in Fiction Writer's Block podcast. Just a side note, if you're a book lover, you need to listen to this podcast. The podcast host asked if the book might be turned into a series, and the author, Nina Simon, said maybe. So here's hoping. So my number 10 book is Mother-Daughter Murder Night by Nina Simon. Number 9. Number 9 on my list goes to The Spy Coast by Tess Gerritsen. This book is the first in a series called the Martini Club series, and it's about retired spies in Maine. The main character, Maggie, which of course is not her real name, is in her 60s. Her last CIA mission went horribly wrong, forcing her early retirement, and she has done her best to create a quiet life for herself in Maine, where she lives in an old farmhouse and raises chickens. However, when a woman shows up dead in her yard, and then there is an attempt on her own life, Maggie realizes that her past has caught up to her. The funniest part of the book is that her small town of Maine is full of retired spies. Some chapters in the book are from the point of view of a cop named Joe Thibodeau, and watching her frustration with all of these former spies, who of course won't admit that they used to be spies, and now have no problem working around the law, is really fun. These retired spies call themselves the Martini Club, so that's where the title of the series comes from. We get a lot of flashbacks to Maggie's time as a CIA agent, and the book has some great settings, including Bangkok, Istanbul, London, and Malta. I heard this author, Tess Gerritsen, speak on the Friends in Fiction podcast as well, and that's how I learned that this was the first in a series. I promise that I'm not advertising for the Friends in Fiction podcast. It's just really good. So, The Spy Coast is number 9 on my list of books. Number 8. Book number 8 on my list is City Under One Roof by Iris Yamashita. This author is an Academy Award-winning screenwriter, and I can definitely imagine this book as a movie or a series. It's set in a tiny Alaskan town where the whole town is in a single high-rise building. So all the people in the town live in this building. Stores and restaurants are in the building. There's even a police force in the building. Y'all, this is based on a real town in Alaska, the town of Whittier, which has 205 residents who all live in the same building. I heard the author, Iris Yamashita, on the Writer Files podcast, which is another podcast that you need to be listening to. And she said that her book is based on Whittier, though of course she fictionalized the characters and events. The main character in the book is a detective named Kara Kennedy, who goes to the town of Point Medier, which is the city under one roof, to investigate a possible murder, and then gets snowed in, causing the tunnel that is the only access to the city to be closed. So she's stuck in this building with a bunch of people who don't really like her, one of whom is possibly a murderer. The character of Kara has ghosts from her past that she's struggling to deal with, and of course, everyone in this town has something to hide. Kara has a very tragic event in her past, and the book could have easily gotten a little too depressing in focusing on that, but I felt like the author did a good job of showing us that yes, Kara struggles and is sad, but she's also doing her best to fight her way out of that tragedy and do her job of catching bad guys. I really enjoyed the book because the setting was just so cool and claustrophobic. And the townspeople were all so interesting. They were realistically quirky without being annoying. This book is also the first in a series, and the next one is called Village in the Dark. It further explores the main character, Kara Kennedy, and looks like it focuses on her solving a crime from her past. It will be published in February, and you can bet I will be reading it. Number 7. Book number 7 is The Resemblance by Lauren Nossett. I learned about this book because Facebook randomly advertised its sequel, The Professor, in my Facebook ads. Who knows how the Facebook ads work? Was it advertised to me because the book is set in Georgia and I live in Georgia? Was it advertised to me because it's set on a college campus and I'm a professor? Who knows? But this is one time where Facebook actually got it right because I really loved both The Resemblance and The Professor. I really love books that are considered campus thrillers. I actually didn't even know that was a genre, but apparently it is. And as the kids say, I'm here for it. The Resemblance is set in Athens at the University of Georgia, which is very cool because I've been there and I recognize a lot of the streets and landmarks written about in the book. The author, Lauren Nossett, is a professor herself, and she really understands the ins and outs of a college campus, what the students are like today, what pressures students and professors are under. The main character in The Resemblance is a cop who is investigating the suspicious death of a college student. He's a member of a fraternity, and she ends up finding out all kinds of secrets that his fraternity is hiding. The book has a pretty cool twist at the end that I did not see coming. As soon as I finished The Resemblance, I read its sequel, The Professor, and I enjoyed it just as much, maybe even more. Again, because I am a professor and because I'm familiar with the UGA setting, these books may resonate with me more than they might with others, but I think everyone will find them exciting and atmospheric. So, The Resemblance by Lauren Nossett is number 7 on my list. So for book number 6, which is the final book that I'll talk about in this video, I want to change things up a little. All of the other books that I've talked about have been mysteries or thrillers published within the past 2 years. But number 6 is different. This book was published way back in 1938, and it's a children's book. It's called Thimble Summer. All the other books I read on my Kindle, but this one I read as a real book for a couple of reasons. I first read Thimble Summer when I was 10 years old, so that's been 32 years ago. Ugh. I bought it at a book fair when I was in the 4th grade. I can remember reading it right before school got out for the summer, and it was just the perfect summer read. It's about a 9-year-old girl named Garnet growing up on a farm in Wisconsin, and it tells about all of the adventures she has throughout the summer. It's very episodic, and each chapter tells a separate story, but they all come together to tell the story of Garnet's fun, magical summer. In one chapter, she and her best friend get locked in the town library overnight. In another chapter, it tells the story of the family building a new barn. They have to stay up all night firing a kiln, and Garnet has never stayed up all night before. And it tells about her excitement of staying up all night, getting to eat a picnic at midnight, and then a mysterious visitor comes out of the woods. Like I said, I first got this book when I was 10, and I've read it almost every year since then. I always read it in May or June at the beginning of the summer, and it seems like the summer just can't start for me until I've read this book. This year was really special for me because I read this book to my daughter Sarah for the first time, and she loved it. It took us about a month to read the book. We were reading about a chapter a night. That was just such a special experience for me. Thimble's Summer also influenced the book that I wrote this year, which is set in present day, but is also about a girl spending the summer on her family's farm. I think it has some of the same happy feeling that Thimble's Summer has. So, if you like children's books or if you have a kid who likes to read, definitely pick up Thimble's Summer by Elizabeth Enright. It's number 6 on my list. So, that's books 10 through 6 on my top 10 list. Have you read any of those books? I'd love to hear your thoughts on them. I'd also love to get your book recommendations. If you enjoyed what you saw today, please like and subscribe. Please watch part 2, which will be about my top 5 books that I read this past year. Happy reading! Now, go clean your house while I read.